afternoon, everyone. Happy Sabbath. Yeah. So it's my great privilege to stand before you, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. So the AIIAS is, as you know, is academic organizations and institutions. So it's very happy to share our thinking and our knowledges and our concepts to one another. So this AIIAS, what is the official name of that?
We have
AIIAS African Theological Association. Yeah. They have a good chance to share and then communicate and enjoy with one another. So thank you for all the officers of these associations, and also thank you for the attendance this afternoon. So my topic today is the why servant leadership. Why servant leadership? Before we discuss about the servant leadership, I want to give you one question. What is leadership? We are so many times talking about the leadership. What is leadership in your understanding? Influence, yeah. John Maxwell defined like that. Yeah. Leadership is influence, nothing less, nothing more, nothing less. Yeah. You know, some of the case, if we don't fully understand about the leadership, maybe just that we can to touch the one part of the elephants and think, oh, that is the elephants. We have to have a whole picture of the leadership. But to be honest with you, I felt the more study, the more difficult. The more difficult. Because this society is not as simple. Very complicated. So the leadership, the one size, that is my very favorite phrase to use in the class. One size, not fit all. So one leadership style is not good for every situation, under circumstances. It's never truth. It's wrong. Even though leadership is considered a popular topic in many organizations, its role and function in the organization is not fully understood. Strange to say, numerous articles, surveys, and books have been published, but still, ambiguity of leadership exists and no agreement on the definition of leadership has been made. It means that the leadership is very complicated and cannot be exactly defined, even though there are maybe more than 350 definitions about leadership. But still, we cannot find exact definition on leadership. So, James McGregor says, leadership is one of the most observed and least understood phenomena of the earth. We are frequently talking about that, but still, we have very little understanding about that. That is the problems. So, I want to discuss in some major topics. First, I will describe the importance of leadership and define church leadership. What is church leadership? Briefly. Then I will suggest the best form of church leadership from the example of Jesus Christ. And finally, I will describe the true characters of servant leadership. The leadership in an organization is a common theme seriously considered nowadays. This phenomenon is also recognized both inside and outside the church. Numberless theories, skills, and principles regarding leadership emerged and faded away, but people are still athirst for the true leadership. Why are the people still hungering for leadership, even in the inundation of leadership topic compared to any other eras? There are numerous books and articles on leadership, but true leaders are rare. If you go to bookstore, hundreds of books are on the shelf regarding on the topic of leadership. But it's very rare to find good leaders around us. Where are the true leaders? Marshall Locke says, what worries them the most was not production or profits or competitions, but this: where have all the leaders gone? Where have all the leaders gone? Another very famous scholars on this leadership topics, the Alvin Malthus and then William Mancini, says, the thirst of the leadership is apparent throughout society. No matter where we turn, we see the severe lack of faith in the leadership of our schools, religious organizations, and governments. According to George Barna, he's very famous scholar in church leadership. He spends the 15 years of diligent digging into the world around him. And then central conclusion of his research is lack of leadership. And then after his 15 years study, he concludes like this: the central conclusion is that the American church is dying due to a lack of strong leadership. In this time of unprecedented opportunity and plentiful resources, the church is actually losing influence. The primary reason is the lack of leadership. Nothing is more important than leadership. Just he make a conclusion like that. After 15 years of researches, the American church is dying because the lack of strong leaderships. Strong leaderships. Therefore, he says that unless we develop the leadership within the church, we are not doing all we have been called by God to do to effectively and obediently serve Him. So he just point out, recovering the strong leadership is the primary things in the church have concerns and to do. John Maxwell also explained like this: the strength of any organization is a direct result of the strength of its leaders. Weak leaders equal weak organizations. Strong leaders equal strong organizations. Everything rises and falls on leadership. This John Maxwell's statement is very crucial and tell us the important lessons about the importance of leadership in any organizations. Everything rises and falls on leadership. So if you work as leaders, any organization or the institutions or whatever, the fail or success is depend on the leaders, depend on you. There is no excuse about the falling down of your organizations. As long as you works as leaders in your societies, or the organization, or community, their success and failing is totally depend on you. There is no excuse. So I want to define the leadership briefly. As I mentioned before, the more than 350 published definitions. But there is no time to check all the definitions. Just I want to select the two important things to me. We must have a picture of these topics. Leadership, generally speaking, suggests movement and progress. And it can be described by words like a change, influence, movement, growth, or journeys. So I want to introduce two definitions, including the above mentioned notions, the influence, the movement, the growth, or journey, whatever. That kind of concept is involved. The first one, the Peter Nordhaus says, leadership is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goals. Leadership is a process. He defined the leadership as the process, even though the final goal of leadership is to achieve the goal of the organization. That is the final goal of leadership. But when he focused on the process in achieving the goals, he implied some important consideration on leadership. It means that he emphasized the relationship between the leaders and his followers or subordinates. And then also the interactive event. He considers about the interactions in the organizations between the members, leaders, and followers. So it's not just one singular event, it's a set of actions, series of actions. So from the beginning till the end, the leaders have to involved in every steps. That's why he defined the leadership as a process. Not just the one side orders or command. And then the second definitions I want to introduce you is Malthus and Mancini said a servant who uses his or her credibilities and capabilities to influence people in a particular context to pursue their God-given directions. That is the Christian leadership definitions. One of them. So the leaders, they have to use their credibilities and capabilities for what? To lead the people. To lead the people in God-given directions. This is very special and then unique definitions for the Christian leaders. In addition to these basic definitions, there are some concepts that we have to consider about true leadership in the Christian societies. The Skippel, the professor at the Andrews University Seminary, he was my advisor. He wrote one book, Time to Serve. In that book, he suggests the important concept about the church leadership. That he just tells us we have a misunderstanding about the leaderships. So he just point out that things. The first, the leadership is not positions. he speaks that it is a mistake to speak of leadership in terms of certain office holders. So true leadership in the church is not the position or the titles. And then the second things that we have to consider is leadership is not administration. In the class that I emphasized many times, the leadership is not administrations, because the administration is the handling of present affairs, caring for, and arranging and organizing the present organizations. So they are just focused on the maintain the organizations. So leadership is not administrations. And then the third, he said, leadership is not statesmanship. The ambassador usually represents his own country to other nations, right? But actually, the ambassador doesn't have any right to do. Only he just follow the policies or regulations which decides from their own countries. He cannot adjust, just represent what his own country leaders decide. He can do nothing. So in this aspect, the leadership is not statesmanship. Then I want to move the topics, the why servant leadership in the church. You know, this year the topic of our forum is spiritual leadership. You know, it's very hard to define, especially the spiritual leadership. As you know, maybe one of you, some of you read the books, very famous book written by the Blackaby's, Spiritual Leadership. He defined the spiritual leadership like this: moving the people onto the God's agenda. Sometimes it's simple, but when you consider about this definition once again, it's very difficult. And then what it is, you can have another questions. What is spiritual leadership? Very difficult to understand. So my understanding is this. You know, the leadership concept and then all the theories comes from secular world, not in the church. The leadership is not originated from the church, Christianity. So they're all skills and they're all definitions, all things, concepts are borrowed from the secular world. But there are big problems when we practice in the church, because the society and church is totally different groups. So in order to separate, they just create, the Christianity scholars create the one word, that is a spiritual leadership. But it is a very conceptual figures, very abstractive. We can have a clear picture. What is spiritual? Pray sincerely? Or the preaching the biblically? What? What is spiritual? Especially in leadership. So even though we have a big, the beautiful words in our hearts, but we don't have a clear picture about that. So why servant leadership? I think this servant leadership is a visual form of spiritual leadership. In servant leadership, we can find what is spiritual leaders. It's visible form of a spiritual leadership. You know, the most leadership theories and types usually focus on the situation and human beings, the employees usually. For example, Douglas McGregor felt that most human beings dislike work, and avoid it whenever possible. That is theory X premises. People dislike work and avoid it whenever possible. They try to avoid, run away from the works. They dislike it. If they have that kind of concepts, what kind of leadership the leaders they have to show? That is autocratic, autocratics, and control-oriented device have to produce. So their management or leadership style is forceful, autocratic, and then force them to do something. But the other side, theory Y, people generally responsible, wants to do meaningful works and capable of self-directions. That kind of things belong to theory X. It's for example, the theory X is very pessimist, but the theory Y is optimistic views. When the leaders they have optimistic view, their leadership style also changes. Conciliatory behaviors. They just want to help and prepare something more, what they want, they like, to encourage them, motivate them to do the effective works in their duty or responsibilities. So this one is based on the concept of the leaders shown and practiced in different ways. When they have pessimistic concepts, they are forceful and autocratic. But they have optimistic views, they are generous and helping the people or the employees. Another theory is well known, the situational approach theories. It's Halsey Blanchard says. You know, this one, maybe the students who study about the leadership, maybe very well-known concepts. This is situational leadership. That is this, the leaders showing his leadership style in different situations. So the first stage is S1 to S4. Their leadership style is changed and moving based on the context. If the employers are very low and then they are beginners, the leadership style should be directing or the telling. You have to do this. You assign what they to do. But finally, they are all the workers, and then the employees are very expert in their areas, and then they are willing to work. Then your leadership style, no more directing. Instead of that, delegating. Just let them do what they want. Delegate. This kind of leadership style should be changed based on the situation. That is the situational approaches. But even though there is a very good theories, but the theory X and Y, and then situational theories only focused on the leaders. And then the leaders, how can you handle the peoples? How can you rule over the peoples and then lead them to make good results? You know? These are all the leadership theories or management theories focused on how to rule over the peoples efficiently and effectively. That is the main concerns. But servant leadership is totally different. Because the servant leadership concept is focused on his own mindset, leader's own mindset, rather than on the situation or the other peoples as the object of control and manipulate. In other words, servant leaders focus not on the nature of peoples who are under his control, but on the leader himself attitude in serving others. So, servant leaders put himself in the place of a servant. The Christian leaders put himself in the place of a servant, and then put the peoples in the seat of a master, and think about how to serve them. Not how to control them. That is the difference between the secular world, the leadership theories, and servant leadership theories. The peoples, just the other scholars, all the leaders in secular world, they try to manipulate the peoples to get a much product or much gains or achieving the organizational goals. Yeah. That is their main focus. But servant leadership is not thinking about the result itself. They just focus on how can I serve to others. So the secular world theorists always put the leaders on the top. But the servant leaders put the leaders on the bottoms. So how can I serve them? That is the main differences between secular leadership, the theorists, and servant leaders. The leadership in the church must be different from the world because the church is not a company or business organization which is established for the gains. So the leadership styles and concepts should be different. The concept of servant leadership prevailed in the Bible throughout the history of God's peoples. Great characters in the Old Testament, such as Abraham, Moses, Daniel, and David, refer to themselves as a servant of God. And also in the New Testament, Peter, James, and Paul call themselves also servant of God or a servant of Jesus Christ. Why servant leadership? Because the core value of it is love. The love. The core value of the servant leadership, as I said, is love. They just serve other people with love. Love. You know, all the theories in leadership or management, they are focused on the efficiency. Efficiency. How can they input minimum and then produce maximum? That is their main focus. So even though that is a very good idea, but if it's not efficient, they just get rid of them, discard it. But in church leadership, it's totally different. We just serve the people with love. Not the result or product. Just with love, we serve others. That is the core concept of servant leadership. This love is a starting point of history in the salvation of sinners. Because he leaves his people, he came to the earth and served the human beings. And then also he sacrificed in love in the form of servants. So servant leadership is an embodiment of God's love, biblical teachings, and the attitude of the man who is sent from God. Now I want to briefly mention about the principles of servant leadership in the life of Jesus Christ. Oswald Sanders evaluated the teaching of Jesus on leadership. Many of his teachings were startling and revolutionary, and none more so than those on leadership. Oswald Sanders also very famous in spiritual leadership. He wrote one book on the spiritual leadership, and then he said this one: many of his teachings were startling and revolutionary, and none more so than those on leadership. The gospel writers saw the importance of his teachings on leadership, and each of them recorded his central concept of service in the books. So he just in the Gospels that we can find that the attitude of servant leadership of Jesus Christ. Jesus proclaimed, "I came to this earth to be served, to serve, not to be served. I came to earth to serve, not to be served." So this concept is mentioned in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Theodore Ingston says, Jesus teaches all leaders for all time that greatness is not found in rank or position, but in service. He makes it clear that true leadership is grounded in love, which must issue in service. The greatness is not found in rank or positions, but in service. He just pointed out correctly about the core concept of Christian leadership in servant forms. So I want to suggest several characters about the principles in servant leadership. The first one is humility. Humility. Jan Wilkes says the servant leaders humble themselves and wait for God to exalt them. Humble themselves. The humiliation is the first principle in servant leadership. Jesus says that for everyone who exalted himself will be humbled, and he who humbled himself will be exalted. So in our church, everything is different from the secular world, you know. So as Jesus mentions, in order to try to himself, to exalt himself, he'll be humbled. And then he put himself in the humble place. God will exalt him. You know, in the world, all the people that try to reach the highest point by themselves. Right? But in the church, it's totally different, opposite. So humility is the core principles for the servant leadership. God humbles and God exalts. Peter pointed out this truth. Humble ourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper times. 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6. In other words, when one exalts oneself, it is the worldly, carnal natures. So if you reach the highest point, that is a secular mind. It's not the Christ mind. Self-exaltation is nothing but pride, but which goes before the destructions. Voluntary humility before God, allowing him to work in a person's life, and seeing one's true self before God and God's call on one's life, results in God's exaltation on that person. Charles Manz says, don't seek honor. Rather, let it seek you in its own ways, and when the time is right, don't even think about it. Go about your business pursuing constructive works and focused on honoring and recognizing the contributions of others rather than your own. If you do this sincerely, your efforts will often receive the recognition they deserve and more, as you don't seek and expect it. So you have to focus not your own achievements or your efforts, but rather than others. Okay. Time is over, so. And then the second one is the obedience. This obedience tells us the will of God, not your own intentions or your purpose or your design or your plans. Only God's purpose. Lord Doran says that Jesus conceived his mission as one of obedience to the Father's will. And also here, Jesus is our greatest single example of genuine obedience, Maurice Vanden says. And then as the Son of Man, gave us an example of obedience, Ellen G. White says. So this obedience is another character and principles in servant leadership. And then the third one is build teams, building teams. There are many things that we have to consider about that. There are 4 stages in the ministry of Jesus Christ on the earth. The first one is the forming stages. And then second one is norming. And third is storming. And finally, there's performing. When Jesus trained his 12 disciples, he just followed these different stages. So through these stages, he makes the good teams. And then after his death, and then resurrected, then he just go heaven. Just left the 12 disciples as a team. He doesn't worry about that, about the missions of its incarnations. Even though in the human side, they are very weak. You know, the 12 disciples are very weak. But during the 3.5 years, God made a team. So just he gave his missions to these 12 disciples as one team, and then he left. And then, you know, if you read the book of Acts, the disciples as a team successfully achieved their missions. You know? So team building is very important element in servant leadership, because the God's work is not done by one person, by all the members. And then finally, the fourth one is the relationship. So this relationship is not overt, but amongst. Jesus mingled with his peoples, not separated from them. He doesn't have any hierarchical systems. Just he mingled with them, among relationship, not the above. That is very important concept in our church, especially in the servant leadership. So my conclusion is this. Jesus' leadership is then in which power is constantly abandoned in favor of love. It is a true servant leadership. Jesus' leadership is then in which power is constantly abandoned in favor of love. You know, he gave everything. He gave up everything. What he had in heaven, he just forgave. But unfortunately, in our human side, the people, the leaders try to get what he doesn't have. As we compare the form of servant leaders of Jesus Christ and then present leadership, we can find many things. And then we have to consider many topics. What is true leadership, the servant leadership? So, Jesus' leadership is then in which power is constantly abandoned So he just served. He came to this earth to serve the peoples, not to be served. As long as we have this kind of a concept in our hearts. So the servant leadership is not the matter of head, not the matter of the knowledges, but it's the matter of attitude and the matter of love. So that is my conclusions for this presentation.
I think that it's like if you wanted to take the course of leadership now, right? It's very good. Now we have time for questions, comment. Oh, yeah. Somebody to help in the microphone. Yeah. Yeah, let's go. Mike.
Jesus came to serve, and in his ministry, he was able to serve for 3.5 years. But today, in church, we have our setup of 5 years term. I don't know whether these 5 years sessions which we have, where do we get, and is it servant leadership? And Jesus, he served only for 3.5 years. So I'm in dilemma. How many years could you suggest for the leaders to be in service?
To be a good leader is not a matter of time, John. Yeah, it's depends on your understandings. Yeah. Just some people take longer, or some people take shorter. But it's how you understand, and you make a decision to follow the example of Jesus. It's not a matter of times. Yeah. It's a matter of your hearts.
What will be your response to someone who says that the intention in leadership is the same in the secular world or in the religious world? Because in any case, they want to reach the highest place. In the secular world, they fight for the highest place. And in the religious setting, they just serve, but to reach the highest place. What is the difference?
So, how can I explain these things? Maybe already you have answer in your mind, right? I don't know I can say these things in this place, but in class I can say freely, but I'm a little afraid of it because it will be recorded in the... So, as long as you have the mindset to be a great man, even in the church, actually I can say is that you cannot be a good leaders. Maybe you can be a great leaders. The people are recognized, but you cannot be really good the servant leaders. Because the servant leaders didn't take any positions. In Jesus' case, when I studied these things, I found very important lessons. I don't know how can I implement in our life. There is different things. What I learned is Jesus, he possessed everything. He has power, rights, authority, glory, and everything he has in heaven. but he gave up and come down to the earth. If he want to organize some association in his time, maybe that's enough, right? He can have a big and wonderful association he can have. But he never tried to do that. He never. But nowadays, in our church, I don't know the other denomination, but our Adventist church, if you became the higher leaders, the benefits and then many things to follow, bigger and bigger. If you go higher, the benefits and authority and powers and bigger. That's why the people try to become leaders in the church. That is my thinking. If you have that kind of a concept, to enjoy your benefit when you become a greater and greater leaders, you cannot be a true servant leaders. Jesus, he gave up what he has. But nowadays in our church, I can see many cases, the leaders try to get what he doesn't have.
Okay.
Okay, I have two questions.
Wow.
I have two questions. Number one, in our church during election, people travel from place to place, even on a plane. Go to Europe, go to Africa and other places for campaign to be elected or to sustain them in the position. Is it really servant leadership? Number one. Number two, is this servant leadership actually, is it something true? Is it something that you have seen or we have seen in life being practical? Yes, we know that Jesus used it. But have we ever seen anywhere on this globe? Thank you.
These two questions, very simple and hard to answer that. Maybe you can answer by yourself. And then you can examine yourself. Am I really a servant leader? But one thing that we can clearly understand and can see that is, it's very rare to find the true servant leaders around us. So implementation, even though I suggest some principles, and then you can read many books regarding on the spiritual leadership or the servant leadership, but the principles is very, very hard to implement in your life. So you became the true servant leaders. So you can show yourself examples to others. Okay.
Okay. But the last question, if we can.
Sorry.
Oh, okay, no problem. I was thinking about you. If you allow us to take your time, it's okay. We can have
next presenters. We have to.
No, we don't. We are the last.
Oh, really?
We take the last four, and that's okay. Is that okay? Pastor Eso, Pastor Ralph, and who else?
Oh.
Okay, that's all.
Too many questions.
I have a question and preoccupation also. I've heard that leadership is not position, administration, statesmanship, and since I've been here listening to the presentation, I'm a little bit not satisfied because they will say there is no definition about leadership and we don't have really what is leadership. And when I went through all the things that people are saying about influence, about everything, I see everything is about character. Why we don't call it charactership? why we are staying only in leadership, and still we say that there is really not a term that is used, but I see everything is about the character, humility, love, and everything. So you just have to come with another word who can help us easily to have the concept that we want people to grab. If not, we will just say that leadership is many things, but no things at the end. The other problems that I have concerning position, we talk about Jesus as a servant leader. I think that is related to his position. If Jesus is looked as a servant, is rather in the Bible is always compared to his position, his first position as God he was, and then he served. So I don't know if leaders is not really related with position when we talk about the Bible and Jesus. And when we talk about the concept of servant leadership, I think position is there, because if we put Jesus is the position between his position and what he's doing, that makes it the servant leadership.
You know, when the skipper says the leadership is not positioned, that means if the person who didn't take a position, he is not leaders. If the person who doesn't have any position, he cannot be a leader. Usually we think the power and authority only comes from the positions. That is true, that when the people take some positions, that there is the legitimate, the power and authority follows. But leadership is not at all. True leadership is whether they have a position or not, as long as they give influence to others, he can be a leader. So, as I said, the John Maxwell says the leadership is influence. Based on this definition, everyone can be a leader, because we are all giving influence and receiving influence from others, whether it's good or bad. Even in family, even in the class, every person exchanges the influence of one another. So just as we think about the influence itself, we can be all leaders. But when you think about this servant leadership, is your activities and your service is based on love. Only love. How much do you love your members, your friends, and then any persons around you? That is the main point. In order to take high positions, you serve. What is the reason you serve others? That is the main point you have to think. So actually, we cannot say you have to do this. In order to be a true servant, you have to do this and to do this. We cannot make a checklist, because that is the matter of hearts. Matter of hearts.
I think one of the problems we are having now is that as we contradict ourselves and we don't make it specifically, that is the reason why I think more questions are coming. Because last night I made a mention of Joseph. When he was in Potiphar's house, he was a leader, because he was the one leading the servants in the house, until after 13 years that he got into the height. But the point I'm saying is that if we don't make it clear that every position at the school superintendent is a leadership, and we say that it is not a position, it is very difficult, because Joseph suffered to become a prime minister, and I think even the current GC president had gone through. He was in Africa in 1978 when I was starting work. I know the difficulties he has gone through. He went to Russia, he went to several places, and if he becomes a president, we are now attaching that the reason why he's there is because his salary is big, he travels more. We are making it's a little bit cheap to me, as if his life about 35 years of serving the church is nothing, but it is the position he wants. That is the reason why he's there now. And we have to. I want to get clarification for that one, because other people, we have Daniel, he suffered before he became big. We have John lived getting to 90 years, Ephesus, the way he suffered there. And if we begin to brush that one aside, and we say John is not a leader, then my mind, I'm finding it a little bit difficult.
How can I answer about that? Yeah, you know, the Joseph, when he was served in the Potiphar's house, and then when he served in the palace as a prime minister, his mindset is the same, not change it. Not change it. The position is not a matter of his life. Yeah. Even when he served as a slave, also he served there, faithfully and sincerely. His attitude is the same as in the palace as a prime ministers. So our church, all the leaders, or maybe all of you, when you go back to your country and your mission field, you will become leaders anyway, right? You have to keep the same attitudes. Do not try to get the positions. If you're focused on the position or title, it can be a great temptations and then the pitfalls. Instead of motivating you to work more hardly and sincerely, it can be a pitfall for you. Do not covet the position or titles. So actually, we can discuss many things, but
the last one.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to ask a question, but before I would just like to say, if only we could apply spiritual leadership in the church, I think Jesus may come this year, because in that case, many things will come to change. Because many things we learn in leadership, I don't want to be pessimist, they are more theory than practice. We learn them, everybody know them, but the moment people are put in position, they sit on them. And the next person will think about the next consequences and so on. Everybody will talk about those who are in position. The day he is given the same position, he will not change anything. He will try to have some car, some good bank account, credit card, and after the next constituency, he will be traveling. People think about changing maybe the 3rd or the 4th years. Everything we say is they are very good. We will close this forum, we will pray, and people will not change too much. But I don't want to be pessimist. I believe God can do something. What I want to ask, many books are written about the issue of leadership. Still, leadership is in crisis. I want to ask your personal opinion. Do you think leaders are made or they are born? Do you think leaders are made or they are born?
It's very classical questions. Yeah. Personally, I believe the leaders are made, not born. Yeah. Yeah. That's why we have a leadership class in the curriculums. If our leaders are born, no need. No need of education or training. Yeah. Because they inherit the leadership characters or traits from the God or the whatever. Yeah, no need. But we have leadership seminars and forum like this. These are all we think leaders are made.
Finish with Ralph?
Yes, Doc, I just want to say thank you for your presentation. Firstly, I would like to ask you on this thing that you mentioned that if a leader in the secular world, people is searching for the highest position. But in the church, we're supposed to be like Jesus and searching to serve. Does that then mean if we do not have that mindset of Jesus, of serving, and we search for high positions, does that mean that in fact, what I want to say is that searching for high positions in the church is for me a connection, the same connection of being in the secular world, searching for the highest position, searching just for your own good and not that for people. So if we take that, then my question arises, what happens if we get to sessions and we have to make a decision whom we will put in certain positions? What criteria do we need to look at? What type of things we have to look at and say before we put a person in that highest positions?
I don't know. Maybe yours, the conference or union conference members, that you may ask what the character or the qualification is really needed to choose the union president or the conference president. Yeah. But depend on the situations. But we have to consider one thing: he is a true servant of God. Maybe if you carefully observe his attitudes, you can easily find out. No? Easily find out his selfishness, or he's motivated by self-indulgence or the God-given purpose. Yeah. So if you are spiritual persons, you can recognize who are the spiritual leaders, because the spiritual things discerned by the spiritual